The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Lighting Controls Podcast. We have another fantastic guest for you today, but before we jump into everything, I just want to take a brief moment to remind everyone that today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. And again, I'm going to keep reminding you, check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. We've got all of our episodes there. Got a news feed, and we even have a merch store if you want to support the podcast. But let's get into it. So today we have Robert White. Robert, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
Sure. Allow myself to introduce myself. Robert White, I'm a architectural lighting designer, and I'm principal here at Illuminart, which is a lighting design firm based outside of Detroit. And we're also part of Peter Basso Associates, which is a MEP firm of some size, actually, here in the Detroit area as well. And we're based in Troy, Michigan.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's really great to have you here. I think what's interesting about the business model that you have there is similar to kind of how I got my start in the architectural lighting design world, with an engineering firm that had a small lighting design group underneath its umbrella name. And so I'm just curious if you wouldn't mind sharing sort of how that operates in a normal project system. Do you do lighting design all the time under the Illuminart, or do you do lighting design with the big engineering firm as well?
So Illuminart, our involvement with Peter Basso Associates, or PBA, started some years ago, and it was collaboration, really. At that point, we were a totally independent lighting design firm that was established in the mid-'80s by Stefan Graf, who's wonderful and still around, still practicing lighting, great to work with. And we'd collaborated on work over the years, and we'd always gotten along quite well. They have an in-house engineering team, electrical engineers, and some are very talented lighting designers as well. But there's always a good collaborative effort. And at some point, as things were developing in the company, we were approached, and would you like to merge our forces? So we put some thought to it, and we did. At first, we were a little hesitant. There's some things that we thought, well, would our brand disappear within the Peter Basso, the PBA brand? Mm-hmm. But we had a strong, good, solid understanding at the very beginning, and that happened 7 years ago now, and it's been wonderful.
Wow.
So we're still Illuminart. Most of our work is done through our auspices, the clients that come through us. But about a quarter of our work does come through our friends here at PBA, our family members in the engineering world. So it's a little bit of both.
Sure. And so I imagine that there's a lot of really interesting discussion and collaboration that happens as a result. We've talked to a couple of people who have either come from AE firms or from MEP firms that kind of their perspective is when you have everything under one roof, it makes it a lot easier and more streamlined.
Yeah, and that was one of the benefits of the merger. They are literally right over there. And it's great for us because some of the controls aspects we're pretty solid in controls, but like the nuts and the bolts of putting the deliverable together, one line diagrams, those sorts of things, to have the engineering team just right over there that we can bother. And by the same token, they'll stroll over and sort of stand over like me. It's like, and you can see the look in their eyes, like they've got a lighting question. It's like, can I help you? So then there's like, I got this thing, and it's a lot of fun. We do enjoy it. I guess one of the other benefits, too, of working with a larger firm like this is there's a whole CAD team. They can set up the drawings, all the Revit coordination, all those things, which we struggled, I will admit, right? Just being a small firm before. Some of that stuff, we did it, but it was an uphill climb. Where here there's a team that this is what they do every day, and it's been a great benefit for us.
Yeah, and so on that topic, I mean, and that's something we haven't really discussed a lot when it comes to lighting controls is preferred software for design. I mean, do you do a lot of your lighting controls in Revit?
That's a good question. I should be more clear on this. I know a lot of the documentation is done in Revit. Certainly the drawings are done in Revit, working with the 3D models and the BIM 360s and whatnot. As far as the actual controls go, well, things are circuited in Revit. So yeah, the answer is yes. Yeah.
So
We do
so you
some AutoCAD as well, but a lot of Revit.
but so you basically use occupancy sensor symbols, switch symbols on the drawings in the model in the BIM, and that way you're just coordinating with the circuit diagram and the one line
Yeah,
that the engineers generated.
it's all tied in. There's an extensive family of symbols and model, or I guess the BIM, sort of three-dimensional things that are brought in.
Family.
Yes, there we go. Thank you very much. You know better than I.
I don't know about that, but yeah. So you have families, and basically for people listening who aren't familiar with BIM, building information management is a 3D rendering space environment for all systems to kind of collaborate together. That way you can identify conflicts between different systems. But when we're talking about lighting controls families, it's basically the 3D rendering of the switch and any kind of connection points or attributes you need to think about when you're working with those components. But I think again that's something we haven't really delved into is the process of starting to design a lighting control system with a 3D BIM environment. And so I was curious if you wouldn't mind just sharing what that experience is like.
Yeah, so for us, there's different levels of engagement or different levels of development as far as the lighting controls go. A fair amount of our projects, we focus on the lighting controls narrative. And that's where we, in generic terms, spell out exactly how we want the lighting system to perform or how we want it to interface with other building management systems. We found that's really effective, and it seems to be done pretty widely throughout the lighting design world. Because it's a written narrative. We're not stuck on a particular manufacturer's widget, but this is how we want the system to perform. If we have a good design narrative together, then that can be passed through to the engineer, and then they can take it and develop it from there. Some of our projects, we go specifically for a given lighting controls manufacturer. And of course, there's solid manufacturers been around for decades now. Sometimes the spec, especially for higher educational university work, some state work, sort of government work, they want that 3-name spec, or they want the controls to be available for at least three people to bid on. And again, by having that generic description of how we want the lighting to behave, that sort of allows people to look at it, and as long as they can meet that controls narrative, they probably can at least submit their lighting control system, and then it can be vetted and looked at. Some manufacturers, they're just tried and true. So if we take a name like a Lutron or a Leviton, there's other manufacturers as well that do great stuff, then that's pretty good. And then sometimes we get involved in the theatrical aspect of things too. So that's where you might get into, for instance, someone like ETC, not to drop too many manufacturers, but you all know there's sort of proven players out there. But there's always other manufacturers up and coming as well. And then we have to sort of vet things.
Well, and that's a good point.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, how do you vet a new manufacturer that comes knocking on your door?
Yeah, and we run into this with lighting as well, especially now that we're deeply into the LED age. There's a whole host of manufacturers that have, I'll say, relatively speaking, popped up over the last 5 years that didn't exist before. Whereas you have manufacturers that have been around for over 100 years that are doing LED and are doing good work with LED. So with controls, that whole vetting, it could be a real challenge. And it could be a challenge for new manufacturers coming in, because on the larger projects, we would be risk adverse to specify someone that hasn't been around for a long time, that doesn't have scale and deep pockets. God forbid something goes wrong, but we know they can service the issue. Or they've been around enough that there's reasonable comfort that they're going to be around in 10 years from now or 20 years from now. So it's a big challenge, because what we don't want to do is shut the door on innovation and new people coming in. So if there's smaller projects that we think, actually this would be a good fit, and we talk with the manufacturer, the local agent, which is super important in the whole process. Tried and true people that you can work with, and present that to the owner, saying, there are these controls manufacturers that we've used before. There is this new manufacturer, or newer manufacturer, that actually offers some pretty, things perfect for this job, and they're very price competitive, and it could be a benefit for you to go this way.
So you really have that conversation with the end users about the risk that's involved in trying a new manufacturer, but at the same time, you're not shying away from it. You're just trying to be upfront and clear about expectations.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that
I'm curious.
Go for it,
Do you? Sorry, Webster. I'm just curious though. Do you, when you reach out to the reps, do you sort of take it, if it's a new manufacturer, do you take it a step further and try and talk to local integrators, or even potentially go see a local project and talk to the end users to see how they like the system when you're trying to vet a new manufacturer you haven't worked with before?
That's a great question. The quick answer is yes. There's a couple local integrators here in the Detroit area that are solid. One in particular, they've been around for probably 15 years now, and they're pretty good at giving honest appraisal. They have their own systems that they push, which we're fine with. They're a service. And there's not a lot of new lighting control product that we see coming on to the scene. It doesn't happen very often, but if there's something new cooking, or if there's a manufacturer that's been sort of second tier, third tier, that sounds like derogatory, but some of the smaller manufacturers that don't quite yet have a strong presence, and maybe we haven't looked at them in 5 years, or maybe 10 years, it's been some time, but they'll come around and say, hey, we have an upgraded system, we have this new capability. Absolutely, we want to see what they're up to, because we always have to learn and be informed so that we can help make our good decisions and make good recommendations for the clients and the owners.
Yeah, so I mean, the research part really takes a lot of time and effort. So getting back into this whole workflow that you were talking about, say for instance you have your short list of tried and true, and you might entertain a few new names that have cropped up, but then what happens after that?
Yeah, so that whole process, it's a continuing education thing, and usually this is time we're not going to build a client. This, for us, it's something that's baked into our service. We should be solid with all aspects of lighting, but also lighting controls. So we do want to make sure we're always attending seminars and having agents, reps, manufacturers come into the office so they can plug things in and we can look at it. I lost the thread of your question there.
No, that's fine. I mean, you were going through the workflow of doing a lighting control specification, and so you were talking about vetting the manufacturers, but you started off with the control intent narrative and coordinating the project. What other work do you do to specify a lighting control system, or do you leave things fairly generic on the drawings so that it can be evaluated through the narrative?
We tend to leave things generic on drawings, although sometimes we have a client that's very particular and would like things very nailed down, which is absolutely fine. So there we will get into one-line diagrams, panel schedules, control schedules. We did do a prominent project here for a certain automotive manufacturer in Dearborn, Michigan, that begins with an F. And we did a beautiful building actually with them. And we worked with an engineering firm, architectural engineering firm, with that as a collaborative. And where am I going with this? But that was is a complex project, and they wanted to make sure that everything was just nailed down. So there is the control schedule, of course, the zoning on the plan. We want to make sure all the light fixtures are controlled as the proper groups, right? And then individual moving lights, programmable, intelligent lighting, each one had its own series of digital addresses. And just making sure that all that was put into a schedule. And what was super important for this is not only that the job was built correctly, but then when the integrator came in and was able to program things were kind of set up ahead of time. And if we can get them involved earlier in the project, they have a heads up so they can start thinking about the project, so that by the time they arrive on the job site, they already have some understanding of it. And then critical as well for this particular project was the follow-up, and it's not as-built drawings, but as-built programs. So all the lighting settings, everything was put into a schedule, and it can be sorted by fixture type or area so that there's a document of how the system was commissioned and programmed and functioning.
So speaking of integrators, I'm curious, when you're working on your spec documents, do you write the need or the want for integrators into your projects, or do you sort of leave that at potentially owner's discretion, or how do you normally handle that?
Yeah, there's definitely a discussion for the projects that warrant it. Say, hey, do you have an integrator yet? And it might be, yeah, actually, we've been talking to some people, so that's great. But sometimes it's, we haven't really thought about that, or no. And so if they say no, then it's like, okay. Then working with our engineering team, we have to, every project's different, but we want to make sure that the documentation is right so that the installation process goes smoothly. We've seen nothing but benefit with having an integrator involved in a project. And I think of this project in Dearborn because it was integrating, of course, the lighting, but the shading systems, of course, the HVAC, sound system, all these things. And to be able to tie it together effectively was important so that at the end of the day, the owner sees the touch panel on the wall and they can hit those certain buttons and it does what it needs to do for all those systems. And if it's done correctly, it truly can and does make the building usable for the owner. I think of some of my earlier experiences of doing lighting controls and some of the systems I spec'd way back in the day. And they're not around anymore, but there's a manufacturer called Light Touch Controls. And I just remember it was one of the first big residential projects I worked on. And it's like, yeah, we can do this and we can do that. And we can do these 9-button control stations. And we had like 30 in the house. And the owner was terrified to hit a button because there's so many buttons. Like, which one do I do? And then I roll into the job site sipping my cappuccino. And then I look at it, it's like, I'm terrified. I don't know which button to hit. So in the older days, we could do all these things. A lot of things we do today, we could still do back then, but it was a lot more cumbersome and less intuitive for the owners to use. Now with touch screens and you can program things and you have these pages and with a little bit of tutorial, the owner can actually use the systems. I think of other projects that, not ours per se, but we've all been there. But walking in and doing a lecture at a university and you walk into the big auditorium and you see the sea of buttons on the wall and maybe you're running a little behind and I got to get my laptop set up and oh my God, it's going to start in 7 minutes and just turn all the lights up and be done with it. So fortunately with good planning and programming and graphics, those days are diminishing, hopefully.
Well, hopefully, yeah, for sure. But so I'm curious, if you run into clients who say, "What's an integrator?" What do you say to that?
Yeah, so an integrator is someone that can marry the various systems, and it's the dispersed or the diverse systems or the disparate services. There we go. So HVAC, it could be window shades in this building in Dearborn. It was tintable glass. You could tint the glass down. So when they tinted the glass down, everything looked like you were looking through sunglasses. It really sort of dimmed the lighting down. So that had to be integrated. I mentioned the shades, audio devices, but some of the alarms, some of just the whole building system. And from our experience, the integrator was able to smoothly, I know there's a ton of work behind the scenes and a lot of tapping on the keyboards and everything to get it to marry together. But truly, at the end of the day, they helped provide a seamless execution of the lighting controls and its integration with the rest of the building systems. And it's been very successful. We have a happy owner, happy architect engineers. Ghaffari, I will mention, is the architect engineer that we worked with. Great to work with. It's a good project.
Do you ever get pushback because of the added cost of an integrator?
Yeah. But so far, I'm thinking most of the projects where we've suggested it or where it's been entertained, they've realized the benefit and they brought them into the project. I can't think of one actually where we've suggested an integrator and they've said, no, we're not. We just want the contractor to do it and your drawings should be tight enough that it'll be easy for them. We haven't run into that. So I think probably
Interesting.
the culture's learned as far as the scales of projects that needs this sort of thing or should have
Sure.
this sort of thing. It's being more and more
Yeah, I mean,
obvious.
so I guess from your perspective, is an integrator necessary on every single lighting control project?
Correct. Yeah, sometimes it really is us picking the actual lighting control system after talking with the owner. I think of spiritual work,
Yeah.
right? You've got a church and maybe they have an old Lutron system in there, and it's like, yeah, actually we can use the same thing, just do an upgraded version, or let's go with this because this manufacturer offers some other options that the older system just doesn't have. So
And at which
we'll put
point,
specs together and we'll give it to the contractor or the
Mhm.
GC or even the church, and then they can put it out to bid.
And so ultimately, in a project like that, you wouldn't necessarily need an integrator because it's simplistic enough that the manufacturer themselves can handle the integration work.
Yeah, and sometimes depending where it's at, the project's at, there might be strong enough local, like a good solid agent that's been around for a
Mm.
while.
Hmm.
And there's one here in the area, and every, he's everywhere. And it's like you call him, Gary, working on this church. Can you help out? It's like, oh yeah, so I'll see you Tuesday afternoon. And he kind of goes there, and he's a magic person. He kind of makes things happen. So to have a good local network of agents too is really
Yeah.
helpful.
Well, and there's a theme I'm detecting here, which is longevity.
Mm.
As far as lighting controls, not just the systems themselves, but the people as well. Their presence as an existing entity. I imagine that that's also a really important relationship to continue to develop and foster.
It is, and the controls people out there, they are worth their weight in gold times 10. Seriously, if you got someone that knows controls, and I mean, it's so helpful for everyone, the designers, the
Hmm.
engineers, the owners, the installing contractors, to know that there's someone that, hey, let's call Chris. So there's another person here who's great. He's been doing theatrical lighting since he was 13, right? He knows controls. He's my age. So there's those special people out there that are just great. And for them, and we've seen this, and this is a benefit as well. But if you've got a good agent, they've got a great controls system. They have a staff that can service it. We like to
Hmm.
get them involved early in the project so they get to meet the players. So
Mm.
here's the architect, here's the engineer. They've already got a GC on board, and here's someone that they may not be an integrator, but they still know that their control systems very strongly, and certainly they can support the integrator as well. So just trying to start that earlier, get those connections happening earlier than later, has always been a
And
benefit.
so do you, with your agents in the area, do you basically identify the agents that have that sort of systematic support with technicians in house? And is that an attractant to you as a specifier?
Absolutely, and we'd like to see more of it.
Hmm.
There's a few strong agencies here in the Detroit area that have some on staff amazing people, just really strong.
Hmm.
Some of the other agencies, they're kind of trying, or maybe they don't yet. Sometimes they're very small and they can't. It just doesn't fit.
Yeah.
But if someone has some controls expertise in house, that's so wonderful. And I think that could be a growth thing for agents and reps to have that sort of
Hmm.
capacity.
No, totally, and so it's really interesting to hear this because I think this is something that a lot of we've spoken to a lot of reps, but we haven't
Yep.
necessarily probed specifiers about their perspective of reps, and so getting this feedback. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of reps out there who would have a feeling one way or the other about what you just said
Yep.
because it's essentially it's an overhead thing. The
It is.
service technicians that you have in your in-house, the controls designers that you have in-house, burn a huge amount of time to be able to
Yeah.
support these projects. But at the same time, it's like, well, what you're saying is I seek those out. I want those. I want a rep that can support the lighting controls project from beginning to end so that I don't have to worry.
Yes. And it has to be, struggle's not a right word, but the way you phrased it was perfect as far as having the capacity or the
Mm.
funding or the capital
Hmm.
to sort of maintain someone that isn't out generating specifications, but they're working
Right.
behind the scenes to support ultimately what's installed. And some of the individuals I mentioned here, they're so solid. And you mentioned the relationships are so important. We're all connected, and we all have to help each other. Some
Yeah.
local agents, they do lighting design, and I recognize that, right? They'll run calcs, and that's okay. Probably just saying that is you're going to get some feedback, but maybe not so
Well,
positive.
no,
Yeah.
I,
You know,
I actually want to
it's
probe
the
that a
reality.
little bit, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
I mean, because there is a lot of overlap between what
Mm-hmm.
reps and specifiers do, and in some cases, reps kind of overshadow specifiers and edge them out of the project because they're doing the majority of the work. And I would say that in the same case with lighting controls, that can happen too, where you have so much in-house staff with a rep agency that it's kind of, well, why should you go to a specifier if you could just go to the rep? And so this kind of gets to that question that Ron and I always love to ask people is, who should own that scope? Who should be doing nuts to bolts lighting controls design?
Yeah. Such a great question. And this gets into the question of lighting design as well. So
Right.
I would say like the small projects, small office building, I don't know what, a couple thousand square feet, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 square feet. Typically, we're not going to see that unless there's the owner or the architect wants something special, right? Just like we want to elevate the space, do some interesting things with lighting. Absolutely. Uh, the agents, I mean, they could handle those spaces, and they do. And you know what? Because they see the lighting product every day, just as we do. And in some cases, they know the product better than we do because they see it every single day. And they can absolutely do an excellent job. I know the lighting design industry would not want to hear that, but this is how things are. But the larger projects, usually owners recognize this, and architects recognize it, and interior designers recognize that we need to get a lighting designer on this project. And by maintaining those relationships with the agents, who may sometimes be doing lighting design, just recognizing that, being open and honest about it, and there could be a general person's agreement, right? But some mutual respect for the services that we all provide. And we do have, sometimes they will say, this is not for us, you need to get a lighting designer involved. And that does happen. So it's a balancing act. It's a balance in the industry, and the same goes with lighting controls. Now, from our standpoint, if there's an agent that knows controls inside and out, and we can channel the design so that it speaks to their strengths, because we know it's a good product, we know it's going to perform well, we are happy and thrilled for them to get involved. But still, at the end of the day, it's our project, and it's our liability insurance that sort of covers the project. So whoever's handling it, we want to make sure that it's done properly. And I suppose that could be one risk for the owner if they go totally agents doing the design work. Do they have errors and omission insurance, that sort of stuff? And that's sort of an unknown.
So it's interesting, and I think the big light bulb moment for a lot of people here should be your company is owning the controls, right? And that is not the same for every lighting design firm that we speak to, right? There's a lot of design firms who just do the design, and they feel the controls should be done by the MEP, which in a lot of cases is not the same firm, or they'll let the rep handle it. And I also think it's somewhat territory based on location of where you are in the country. There are a lot of reps who offer those services where the lighting designers are strictly the design firm, or in a lot of cases in smaller markets, you run into the architect is doing the lighting design. It's part of their package, but they don't have controls people, and they rely on the reps. And the really good reps are extensions of the manufacturers, right? So when you need something, like you said, they know the controls inside and out, and that's because they should. Because the rep is the extension of the manufacturer. The manufacturer is based in the Midwest. They can't cover the entire country without putting somebody on a plane. And that's what the reps are there to service and do, and be that local support, boots on ground, to assist, whether it's contractor or lighting designer or whoever they need to, or even local integrator, to be able to be that support and additional body. So for you, it makes a lot of sense that you own that. It's you, but that's not necessarily what we see everywhere across the country and across various firms and principals.
Let me clarify that, because I'm glad you brought that up. So ultimately, because we don't stamp drawings, so we're not
Right.
engineers of record.
Yep.
So ultimately, the lighting controls technically are owned by the engineer, or if it's a design build, then it's owned by the contractor. But we always want to have overview of what's actually what's actually being specified, what's actually being installed, so that we can at least keep an eye on it. And if we see something that's going sideways, hopefully we can catch it before there's an issue. Because regardless of whether it's technically in our drawings or not,
Yeah.
if there's an issue, we're still going to get called in.
Yes, and
Right.
and that makes perfect sense, right? Because you have to own it to some extent. It's your
Some extent,
lighting design,
yes.
right?
Yes.
It's your lighting design. If you have zero say or input to the controls, the narrative, I feel at a minimum, right? I feel every lighting designer should put together a controls narrative at a minimum, because that
Yes.
tells whoever's designing the control system what it should do, how it should operate. But you're right. If you don't have some input or some say into it, now the system may not function the way you intended, the way the owner intended. And then people are left with a sour taste in their mouth. The project doesn't go right, this, that. So you have to have some insight into that. I agree with that completely.
Yeah, and I think of some projects, and it may still be an issue. We haven't seen it recently. We have another similar project going, but doing restaurant work, hospitality, and we got these great chandeliers, and let's use the LED filament bulb. Yeah, great. And then you get the call, they're flickering. We can't dim it. We can only dim it like 5%, and it starts flickering. It's like, oh my God. So at least, like, for instance, in the controls narrative, if we think we have some decorative lighting and there may be a risk of them or potential of them using retrofit lamps, do some testing ahead of time, get some lamps, get the correct dimmers and control dimming switch, and at least try to mock some things up ahead of time so that it's the soft opening, and the restaurant is going to be open in 3 days, and there's this crazy flickering thing going on. So
Well, and I guess that's another really interesting point, because with mock-ups and stuff, you can request it, but does it? How do you ensure that the mock-up actually happens?
we try, but it doesn't always happen. We persuade and try, and hey, we really need to do so when's that mock-up going to happen? Yeah, we're going to do the mock-up. 3 months later, we got to do the mock-up. Well, we'd love to see the mock-up, and it doesn't always happen.
Right. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess from your perspective, all you can do is advocate for good design and implementation. But at the same time, yeah, you don't have control over it. And I think that's a really unfortunate reality with lighting controls in general, is that, there's so much theoretical, and we don't really have an opportunity to show practical components. We don't have the ability to really say, this needs to be at least surveyed and viewed by somebody, so that way it can be achieved. But I think part of it is because we're in such a theoretical world with lighting controls that it's like, well, yeah, it could go flawlessly. The odds of that happening are very slim, though. But I think a lot of people outside of our conclave of people who understand lighting controls don't really get that. They hear, yeah, it could work. Okay, great. Let's just go with that.
Yes, they don't hear the could. The could becomes a can or will.
Right, exactly. But so then, what do you do if you have that flicker issue? Because I imagine that becomes your responsibility.
It does, to try to solve it. So we did a beautiful restaurant here in Detroit. It's an old athletic club, and it was built in the 20s or 30s, and it was really beautiful decor, just really well designed. And it went through an extensive renovation, so we had some custom chandeliers developed, working with the architect on that. And we did specify some LED that we knew would dim, but they were retrofit, sort of not flicker bulbs, but the little flame-shaped LED filament bulbs. And we had warned them. We had warned them, hey, we really need to do some mock-ups and do some things ahead of time to at least reduce our risk of having an issue. So by and large, it actually worked pretty well. But at the lower dim rate, it's not so much there's a flicker, but there's this sort of random pulse, like the light will swell, then dip down, or it'll dip now and then. Totally random. We had sensors. We had one of our engineers actually got involved. We had a local rep, the one I mentioned earlier, come in, and everyone's putting their heads together trying to figure out what's going on. And COVID hit, so the hotel became really quiet. So then we were to monitor like activity, and we're thinking it only happens during certain times. So we're wondering maybe the elevator, when the elevator's used, it was like something weird to the power lines. So it's never fully been issued, but we're able to, I think going with leading edge as opposed to trailing edge dimming, they were able to reset the dimming system, do a different curve, and things did settle down pretty well. And the client, he's fine. They were fine with it, but it was a little stressful at the beginning. There's an earlier project, our first experience with this, and this is probably 7 or 8 years ago now, but as a hotel in Detroit. And there's a chandelier, huge sort of chandelier structure above this huge bar. It's an old fire station in Detroit. And that was our first experience using small LED bulbs. It's just a screw-based bulb. And they couldn't dim it at all. And it started flickering. So there were the manufacturers looking at different ways of programming the system, and it wasn't working. But I remembered something from decades ago on some other project. And I went to a Home Depot or Lowe's or Menards here and picked up a couple incandescent light bulbs.
Yep.
And I went down there and I screwed one in, and the system immediately, it looked like the lights turned off. But then the rep looked and he's realized, oh, it's still burning, but you can barely see them. And then we knew we had found the solution. So they were able to deep dim them. And we installed 2 incandescents so that when the first one burns out, at least there's another one going. And they're G-shaped incandescents.
Oh, yeah.
So they're a little different. Of course, incandescents are disappearing from the world. So
right.
they better stock up on about 50 of those, maybe just to play it safe. So.
Well, I think, the application is also, really what you're doing is you're putting in a high resistance resistor in there.
Yep.
And so, basically you're smoothing that cycle of surging of power with the LED. So, but at the same time, I still do that myself. Like if it's like these LED retrofits are flickering, I will also pop in an incandescent just to be like, okay, yep, problem solved.
Yep. But there are manufacturers that they mount to a 4-square, and they're resistive loads so that you don't have to put in an incandescent lamp, and it mimics the incandescent, right, by giving you the resistance you need and allowing you to dim the LEDs with no issues. I had to install 6 of them into a system not that long ago, so very, very helpful.
Excellent. And we did learn about this, actually. It was another restaurant we were called in to help fix, like maybe we can help it. Different engineering firm. And I'll say, although we're part of Peter Basso, we also collaborate with other engineering firms in the area because, a lot of our work is independent. So they called us in to see if we could maybe help figure out what was going on with the restaurant in Detroit. And we tried some of those tricks, right? And unfortunately, I was so... I was hoping it would work. I was hoping for the ta-da, but it didn't happen with the incandescent. It's like, oh, man. So we put a power conditioner in. They tried that, and it seemed to have helped things a little bit.
Oh, that's good. Well, we're almost out of time here. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's crazy, the things that you have to discover right now with lighting controls. But what's interesting about what we've talked about here is really the fact that your position is a unique position, but it really gives you this opportunity to take advantage of the resources that are around you. So, you're part of a lighting design firm that joined up with a larger MEP firm, and as a result, your collaboration is like so much more improved. And at the same time, you operate as an independent lighting design firm when the larger engineering firm is not involved as the engineer. And so you can really kind of bounce in between these two kinds of project types, one owned by the larger firm, one not. But at the same time, you do have sort of this direct access to the engineers so that you can really get your documentation facilitated. But additionally, as a lighting designer, in general, the relationships that you foster, the people you meet, the manufacturer short lists that you create so that you know what's tried and true, what's a little bit risky, who to reach out to under the right circumstances. Those are really invaluable resources that can only come with time and can only come with, experience in this industry. And so, as much as people can say, I know everything there is to know about lighting controls. It's, there's nothing that you can do to replace that level of experience and knowledge. And similarly, on the other side with manufacturers, there's nothing you can do to replace being around for decades and having gone through thousands of projects and supported them. And so that is something that, there are a lot of people who flag that and say, I don't work with any company that hasn't been around for X number of years. And they might even write that into their specification. So, that's just something critical that people need to keep in mind when they're doing lighting controls design, especially because, if the sales rep, for instance, is brand new and the manufacturer is brand new, they might not even understand what it is that the project needs to be supported for a complete spec. So having those, true. Yeah. And so, having people like you who not only are pivotal and centrally located within a project design, but also have direct access to experienced people additionally, that really gives you that strategic placement to be able to handle the majority of lighting controls systems designs, whether it's just a simple narrative or it needs the complete package.
Yes. I could not say it better. That was great. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so true. And
I love
it's
it.
fun.
All right.
So I know we're wrapping up, some of the newer agents that will come in and you can tell they just went through training and maybe they've only been in the industry for a few years, and you can also see them sort of reading off the mental script of what to say.
Yeah.
Then you have the more seasoned veterans that kind of come in and talk about a few things, and then that's where the discussion happens and the exchange of information and whatnot. So anyway.
Awesome. I love it. Robert, thank you so much for coming on today. Really,
Thank you.
really appreciate the conversation. I think everyone's going to get a lot out of this that listens to it. Whether you're an integrator or a rep or a dealer or a designer, I think everyone's going to get something out of this episode. And I think one of the big takeaways for me is for all designers, right, whether you do the controls design or not, is that you need to stay in and have a hand in the lighting controls to some extent. Even if you don't have a handle in the design, you need to stay involved in the control system to make sure that it operates the way that you and your owner want it to operate. And that's so important. And being able to lean on the resources, whether it's the rep or the local integrator or whoever that is, to help assist to make sure that everything goes flawlessly. Lean on the resources, because at the end of the day, we're all one giant team. I don't care how many manufacturers or companies we come from. We're one giant team. And if the projects need to go smoothly, right? Because when one project goes south for one of us, it goes south for every player involved on that job. So it's very important that we all work together. So yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I just want to take a moment to remind everyone that today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. All of our episodes are there, including a news feed for our industry, as well as a merch store if you want to support the podcast. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us here today. And Robert, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. This was such a great conversation.
My pleasure.